Okay, so folks, you're all very welcome to the Celtic Whisky Fest for Cullen Five Elements 20 Deconstruction. It's delighted to see so many of you here joining us this evening. My name is Darren Maher. I'm the manager of Celtic Whisky Shop on Dawson Street, and hopefully some of you have been in with us before, or have participated in some of our previous online tastings. And I'm delighted tonight to be joined by two members of the Fercullen team. We've got Alan Malone and we've got John Cashman. Gents, how are we?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Nobody ever asked me how I am in these tastings, so that's refreshing, John. Cheers. It's like, screw it, Darren. Nobody cares. I'm good.
Brilliant. No, very important. No, delighted to be here. Delighted to have this opportunity to have a chat through one of our newest whiskies, which has been got some great response lately across the board from people just sampling it and experts, and we're delighted with the way it's worked out, and very happy with it. So a little bit of background. My name's John Cashman. I'm often referred to as an industry veteran at this stage. Unfortunately, I don't feel like it, but seemingly I am. Over 20 years experience working in the whiskey industry, most notably probably for Cooley Distillery and then Beam Suntory. Global brand ambassador for all whiskies for Beam Suntory for a period of time. And since beginning of last year, I've been working as a consultant to the whiskey industry, working with a lot of different distilleries, and presently doing some work with Powerscourt Distillery. So joining me today is the Alan Malone, who's sales manager. I'll let Alan introduce himself.
Hi guys, how are you? My name is Alan, obviously, and I'm the sales manager for the distillery. I haven't got as many years as John has now in the industry, but for the last 10 years I've been improving my CV around the different beer and spirits purveyors and suppliers within the industry. For the last 2 years then I've been employed by Powerscourt Distillery to look after the Irish market, and it's been an eye-opening experience, and seeing some new whiskies come to market that have really blown people away. And over the last few months, last 18 months particularly, doing the 5 Elements releases with our 18-year-old and now our 20-year-old, it's really opened people's eyes as to what the Irish whiskey industry is capable of doing with some exquisite liquids.
Lovely stuff. Lovely. So guys, we're going to play a little kind of introductory video just before we kind of get into the bulk of the tasting. If you do have any questions or any comments for the guys, the chat box is there, so do feel free to throw in your questions and comments. To be honest, we've done enough of these online tastings that we know that it's much better when you guys get involved. So anything at all you want to say, do put it in there, and I'll say it to the guys. And yeah, don't be shy. We're all friends here. And usually what you see is once we're about maybe 2 or 3 whiskeys in, people are a little bit more forthcoming with the comments. So unless anybody's been pre-drinking for this. So guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to get the video ready, and then we'll jump into the tasting.
I suppose the one thing to keep in mind when everyone is sampling before this video starts is they're all cask strength samples. So just word of warning. So, with the exception of the last one, which is the bottle sample. Okay.
Lovely. Yeah.
So John, the inspiration for the 5 Elements second edition, and indeed the first one, probably goes back to when I was working with Barry Walsh on a project when we produced a 10-year-old malt, and it was my first experience of doing different wood finishes. So we had gotten different cask styles, and the idea initially was to see would we bring out a finish. And it was while we were looking at how those finishes were developing that Barry said to me, he says, well, Noel, he says, why don't we use them all? And all of a sudden I says, wow, why didn't I think of that? And the trick then, of course, is not to use or over-influence one above the other. When I eventually then came to Powerscourt, and we were fortunate to have such excellent liquid at 16-year-old whiskies, one of the first things I did back in 2017 was to put some of that malt whiskey that had been matured quite well in bourbon, really lovely whiskey. And you know what they say about finishing, John, you know, you don't put bad whiskey in to finish them off. Some people use finishing or different cask styles to hide a flaw.
Mask, yeah.
But obviously, the best thing to do is to put good whiskey into them because it only improves. So we selected quite a number of different cask styles, laid down the whiskey, and we've been keeping a close eye on it since. There's a lot of product in the market out there that have finishes.
A single finish, maybe.
Single finish, yeah. Exactly. There were very few that were just matured in bourbon only. Mm-hmm. And that's why we did that 18-year-old. So my next challenge was to come up with something different or something new. And while we had all of this lovely stock in the warehouse over the last couple of years, we came up with the idea, well, why don't we do a blend of the different finishes and put that out? And that's something that you won't see much of in the market. So our first 5 elements, again, the 5 elements were different woods, different finishes, along with bourbon, and bringing them together. But you cannot just mix a barrel of this, a barrel of that, and a barrel of the other. You need to blend them together in the right proportion. And as you were saying earlier, the whole idea of a blend, for the want of a better word, is that each element you can taste in the final product. And that's what we hope to achieve when we're doing this kind of production.
Yeah, lovely. I think that covered everything. I think we can call it a night on the taste in there.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, let's just drink them. That's it.
That's just done our job. Yeah.
So I suppose that kind of sets us up for what we're going to be discussing this evening. So Noel talked about that was Noel Sweeney, of course, Master Distiller. The origins of Fercullen and coming to this new distillery with a lot of the stock that he had already made at his previous role. And Alan, I suppose you would be the sales manager. The initial releases from Powerscourt, the 8-year-old blend, 10-year-old single grain, 14-year-old single malt, all American oak, no cast finishes, nothing like that. And then
the whole idea behind them was Noel wanted to put out into trade what he had done back in Cooley, the way he distilled them and what have you, the way he envisaged those liquids going to trade after all their time aging was going out in bourbon. Because as he alluded to in the small segment there, that not a lot of places were leaving those older age liquids as in bourbon. So he wanted to kind of buck the trend that little bit and just be original again.
Lovely. And then I suppose the first time you see Powerscourt doing some cast finishes, some fortified wine cast, was 5 Elements 18-year-old first edition. I suppose just briefly, if you want to give us an overview of what that was and how it set up the 20-year-old.
Yeah, so it was an 18-year-old bourbon that Noel had started with, as John has said in the previous tasting that we've done before. That was his blank canvas as such, and then he was bringing different finishing casks then as his other paints to paint a Marsala piece. So in that one he brought a Bordeaux red wine, a ruby port, and a rum. But the reason we called it 5 Elements, I know there's only 3 finishing casks there, and there was 4 liquids in it. So the reason we called it 5 Elements was 1 distiller, 1 distillery, the 2 types of wood, European oak and American white oak, the 3 finishing casks, the 4 different liquids that were in it, and then the 5th element was Noel's expertise in blending. So that was the keystone behind the whole idea of 5 Elements. And then moving on through, like, that was the first sort of finishing style we had done. So We have released another, the Estate series, another product which we have done a finishing cask in Amarone, but we wanted to complement with the success of the 18-year-old, we wanted to complement it and release another liquid. So along came the 20-year-olds with some fantastic liquids that are available there. I mean, John's going to bring us through them, but like the 18-year-old was one style because it has 3 different finishing casks and the bourbon. It's not really a stepping stone from that. It's an actual new style of whiskey altogether because it's different finishing casks. It's back to a 20-year-old bourbon rather than an 18-year-old bourbon. And it's an exquisite whiskey, I feel, anyway.
Lovely. Well, I think that sets us up for our first sample. So, John, you said you want to start with the Fercullen bourbon barrel element. So that's the first one we're going to go with. So for everyone, that is what your bottle should look like. And John, if you would like to go ahead and take the reins.
Yeah, well, the reason, excuse me, I started with this one was just as Alan said there, you know, Noel described it as he'll start everything with the bourbon barrel matured liquid, and that's his base for everything, and everything off that are little additions to it or subtractions from it, and that's how he paints that masterpiece, as Alan mentioned. This liquid was distilled actually in the year 2000, so it's possibly 21 years of age actually. Excuse me. And it was liquid that Noel had previously made up in Cooley, so it's a double distilled Cooley single malt, which would have been matured in bourbon barrels. The bourbon barrels that Cooley were using in 2000 were all bourbon barrels from the Heaven Hill distillery. The Heaven Hill distillery, excuse me again, their charring level is up to sort of a level 4, which is a pretty serious char. It's also known as an alligator char. That's important to remember because that adds a certain, the intensity of the charring breaks open the oak. It allows filtration. The char itself filters out some of the nastier elements of the alcohol, but it also caramelizes the sugars that are inherent in the American white oak. And the American white oak also is different to European oak insofar as it has significantly more vanillins in the makeup than European oak. So once you've done this heavy char within the barrel, you've opened it up, which allows the liquid to get in, to touch the vanillins, to touch the caramelized sugars, to get all that sweetness. Now, obviously, the majority of that, just like if you're making a cup of tea and you're using a tea bag, the majority of that would have gone into the Heaven Hill bourbon, whichever brand of bourbon they took out of that barrel. So then it would have been shipped over to Cooley and brand new single malt, double distilled malt whiskey put into it. So the reason that they're using that is they're looking for all that vanilla element coming through. Cooley single malt whiskey, and all of these whiskies are double distilled Cooley single malt whiskies, all have a very distinct style. They tend to be very light, very fragrant. They tend to have a lot of fruity elements to it. Younger Cooley liquids, very much green fruits, green apples, pears. If you have an Irish whiskey and it has that aroma and it's like 7 to 12 years of age and it has that aroma of pears and vanilla and apples, you can pretty much guess it's come from Cooley. Okay. Now, with the extra aging, as this whiskey is lasting longer in the barrel, it is reacting differently. Obviously, every year that passes, that's not just a year of maturation, but it's also a year where the liquid has expanded and contracted out of that barrel. So in the summer, when it's slightly warmer, it's going to expand into the barrel. When it expands into the barrel, it's going to touch initially whatever was in it previously, the bourbon whiskey. Then when it contracts back out of the barrel in wintertime, it's going to bring that flavor and then mix it in with the liquid. It hasn't gone in. So you've 20 years of this happening. Now, after a period of time, again, to use the tea bag analogy, you're not going to get so much of the vanilla anymore, or sorry, from the bourbon flavors anymore, because it's now pretty much been soaked in Irish whiskey for 20 years. So there's a different thing coming on there. And you're often finding that some of that vanilla element and some of that green fruit certainly is beginning to change. I find Cooley malts around mid-teens, 15, 16, 17, 18, you're getting more exotic fruit flavors. You're getting more of, and anyone who's heard me speak about whiskey before has heard me use this example. It's you know, when I was growing up, and I go visit my grandmother, and you know, there was always dessert in Granny's house. You know, everyone's granny always gives you dessert, but sometimes dessert might be just something very simple, like a scoop of HB ice cream, but with some cocktail fruit on it, and the cocktail fruit is from the tin, the old tin that you open up, and well, back then it was, you know, you had to open it like that. And as a child, like, it was a treat, but you didn't want the pear because the pear was rock hard. And the cherry, if you like cherries, yes, you went straight for the cherries. It was usually the peaches and the softer fruits that you really wanted, but there was always a fight over who would actually drink the syrup that was left behind. And that was the big fight. And that syrup is what always comes into my mind when I look at coolly distilled malts, 17, 18, 19 years of age. So the green fruit elements of the earlier years have all gone, and now you've got all this exotic fruit flavors going on. So to me, on the nose, you've certainly got, you know, straight away, bourbon barrel influence. First of all, if you just look at it compared to the other samples, it's significantly lighter, and it is 20 years of age, so it is significantly lighter. And then on the nose, you are getting that soft vanilla fruits and touches honey, caramel. Remember those caramelized sugars in the wood, 20 years on those. There's a touch of almost like a char on it as well. It's not peated. Obviously, Cooley do peated malts, but this liquid was not peated. But there is the smell of the char itself there. But honey, vanilla, and then that syrupy cocktail fruit, exotic fruit element going on. So if you want to sip it, I'll never tell anyone how to sip it, but just remember they are all cask strength, so you can add water if you so wish.
Yep. And just Thomas there is asking the ABV on this. So like,
yeah, this one I think is around sort of 53 to 54% alcohol. Okay, all of the whiskeys that we're going to sample are anywhere. I think this is the lowest, but then it's also probably by a year the oldest. The rest, I think the strongest, I think we have one sample which is at 56% alcohol. Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely. That has the kind of, as you're saying, that kind of tropical fruit. I almost get kind of like stewed apples. So I suppose that the freshness of the green fruits maybe become more slightly stewed, almost like you're making them for an apple pie or an apple tart.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like if I'm alone, this kind of almost like licoricey in terms of how it hits the palate, that slightly aniseedy flavor.
Yeah, there is that, and there's a good texture and a good oiliness to it as well, as you'd expect at cask strength, of course. Now I just dropped a few little drops of water into it, and it does obviously break it up a little bit, but there's still, even with the bit of water in it, still significant legs on that. There's a lot of oils in this, and these were literally just when we were decanting the liquid to make the 5 elements. We just took out a few liters extra for this event. So it hasn't even, this liquid hasn't gone through any filtration. It wouldn't even have gone through a barrier filtration at that stage, because that would happen later. So there could be a little bit of char in your samples, I'm not sure. So don't let that put you off. But it is, it's just all of these, you're going to really get that viscosity, that texture, that oiliness in your mouth going on. But I'm similar to Noel in my approach to whiskies. I absolutely love the influence of bourbon barrels. I mean, I've again, lots of people who've heard me talk about whiskies know that one of my all-time favorite whiskies is not an Irish whiskey, but it's a completely bourbon matured whiskey. It's a Scotch malt that is fully bourbon matured, and I just like those flavors that it comes. And I feel sometimes that use of bourbon barrels really allows the spirit itself to sing. It really allows those flavors to come through. I find sometimes that finishes can hide some of that inherent soft, sweet, fruity nature that you get with Irish whiskey. So for me, certainly my ethos, and maybe it's from working with Noel for so long, I'm very much a fan of the use of bourbon barrels.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the trend seems to have been, recently in Irish whiskey is bourbon barrels almost aren't enough. Like you need to do a finish, you need to do a weird cask number 1, 2, but allowing actually the whiskey to speak for itself. Myself and my fiance, who got engaged in Paris Court Gardens, as it happens anyway, back in July. We always have this joke when we're smelling whiskey and we say, smells like whiskey, because I think people have this idea of what whiskey smells like. But when you go in and you get a whiff of that, like it's not just whiskey that you're smelling, it's all these distinct, the stewed fruits, the apple, the tropical fruits. And I think that shows kind of the quality of the liquid that you're actually getting.
No, definitely. It's I suppose that you've got to look at it rationally, and the reason why there's so many finishes in Irish whiskey so much, because there was a limited stock of Irish whiskey, and there was only really two a few years ago, 2 distilleries producing it for third parties. So in order to differentiate themselves, they were all going down the finishing route. I suppose the difference with Powerscourt and with something like this is the fact that the man who made this in the first place is doing what he wants to do with it. And that's why, as Alan said, and as you said as well, that all the initial releases were all bourbon, and certainly that's something that will continue. But this is just something to play around with and try different finishes, but always have that core element is always going to be the bourbon maturation. That is the spine of this, and then the other influences, the other elements come in and play. And one of the things that and we'll see as we go through these, and certainly when we get to the final sample at the end, it's perfectly balanced. There's nothing. It's like an orchestra. I mean, an orchestra, if the violins are too loud, they're going to be drowning out some other instrument, and you can't do that with a really good whiskey. You can't have something overtake the flavor. That's the genius, and that's that's the secret of a good blender, is understanding that and ensuring that, like a good conductor, that you can hear everything at the same time. And certainly with the whiskey, when we get to number 6, you'll hopefully be able to realize where all of these little flavors are coming from.
Absolutely. A couple of comments in there. So we've got Andrew saying that would be a lovely release on its own. Very nice. Fully agree with you there on that, Andrew. That's the thing about these tastings. I feel like whenever people get these deconstructed samples, they're just like, no, I just want this as is. Release 5 different whiskies. And James agrees, what an awesome dram on its own. And then Derek, welcome Derek. And then we've got Mark. This is a wonderful example of pure and honest bourbon maturation. Lovely. And yeah, that goes back to what we're saying. So that is the first sample.
Yes.
I don't know if I said this at the start, but normally these tastings run an hour. Just because we've got 6 samples and 5 of them are cast strength, we're probably going to run closer to the hour-and-a-half mark, just so everyone knows. But I don't think anybody have any issue with that, because these are fantastic. So what we'll do is, if everyone's happy enough to move on, Muscatel is the next one you want to move on to, John?
Yeah. That, I have to say, was a very nice way of saying, I know Cashman talks a lot, so therefore be prepared for that. Use the whiskies as an example.
John, I didn't warn him. I didn't pre-warn him, I promise.
So tell us a bit about Muscatel itself. It's kind of sweeter style of dessert wine. Am I right in saying that?
It is, yeah. It's actually, bizarrely, it is traditionally not a dessert. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up here for a second. Yeah, Muscatel. Yeah, it is Muscatel. That's what I did say. Perfect. Sorry, it is a originally from often it's used as an aperitif rather than as a digestif. And the Muscatel itself is a style of wine that quite popular around Spain and the south of Spain, but it is probably, it's, for me, it's something that is quite citrusy and quite fresh and quite floral. And also, and I know this sounds stupid, but it's quite grapey as well, I find with it. It really is of its ingredient, it always sounds ridiculous when you talk about something that is made of grapes and describe it as quite grapey. But
Yeah, I know that feeling. There's some whiskies that we have in the shop and like tastes like grapes, and like that sounds a bit weird.
Yeah.
There is
But
a real greenness to it. I get where you're coming from. Like there is a
yeah,
real
it's almost like
greenness to it.
yeah, there's almost like I know fig leaves rather than figs. You know, that kind of that greenness, that vegetal, floral, a definite sort of citrusy element going on. But you know, even there's a bit more of, again, if I go back to my cocktail, fruit cocktail, tin of fruit cocktail, there's definitely a touch of apricot or something like that as well here on the nose.
No, I get that absolutely. And then Andrew's on in there saying deeper nose on this for me.
Yeah, it's there's a mustiness to it as well. Like walking into a wine cellar, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Door hasn't been open in whatever, 6 months, and you walk in, you just get that of dusty alcohol aroma,
Or as Brian says there in the chat, high pollen summer day type of combination of nose.
There we go. I'll be talking to you afterwards, Brian, for some tips on that one.
Has he been hanging around with you over the weekend, John?
Yeah,
I feel like it's a cast type that you don't really see that often. I can think of one other whiskey currently that uses it, and I think Noel made that one as well. I suppose, do you think Muscatel it's going to gain a bit more popularity as a cast style, or does it still very much have a niche?
I think it is still quite niche. Firstly, it's they're a bit more difficult to come by. Certainly, one of the last whiskies that I was directly involved with releasing for Beam Suntory was the Tyrconnell Olorasa Muscatel, which was a great combination of the bourbon matured liquids, and then getting a nuttiness of Oloroso, and then that sweet floral element coming through of the Muscatel. So it is. It is still quite niche. I'm not convinced it's one that stands up on its own, but that's just me personally, my personal taste. I'm not convinced it does. I think it is great to add a little element and a little bit of, the je ne sais quoi element to any type of a marriage of different whiskies. A flavor profile that you can't quite pinpoint because it is that lighter floral, citrusy type element coming through on it. Now to taste, it's just add a little drop of water.
So you think this very much it's a supporting player in whatever you use it in. It can't be the star of the show.
Yeah, I'm though look, I'm not a blender.
Yeah.
There is a kind of leathery nature to it now that I've added a little bit of water to it, which is
viscosity to it, like, and its chewiness as well.
Yeah, it's almost reminiscent of an Oloroso, and we do have an Oloroso further down this tasting, but there is that kind of leathery element that you often get with Oloroso. This one is just shy of 55% alcohol. It's 54.9.
Well, I think the sign of a good cast strength is when you're drinking it and you don't just get smack of alcohol. It's an enhanced, more flavorful version of the whiskey as it would be. The way I always describe it is cast strength is the espresso of whiskey. It's you've got your core ingredient, you've less water to it, because you get some and it's just all I get is alcohol. But with these, it's very much like, no, it's just flavor.
Yeah. Again, look, a lot of that is very much the the spirit itself, the whiskey itself, that traditional Cooley style of single malt whiskey, which is widely recognized as some of the finest single malt liquids out of Ireland. And certainly if you go to any recent whiskey awards, be it Ireland or international, and you see all the awards coming through, if it's not a pot still, it's probably got it's a Cooley liquid. Under a different guise or one or another. So the quality is there, and when you're working with that, you're going to ensure that the end product is going to be phenomenal, so long as you don't completely mess it up, you know. But
it's been quite versatile liquid as well, John, hasn't it? Like it's blended, it's blend like itself to any finishing task.
It does because it's not an overpowering style of whiskey, you know. Even the younger, you know, the 6-year-old single malt is perfectly drinkable single malt whiskey, you know, good quality malt that is released that they have released in a certain brand, you know. So it is, and I think a lot of it has to do with the double distillation. Insofar as it holds up, it retains so much more flavor. It hasn't been distilled that third time and brought up to a higher ABV. And one of the things you got to remember, each time you distill, you are purifying the liquid as well, and you are stripping some flavors out of it. And certainly having a double distilled single malt whiskey, it's just going to have significantly more oils, it's going to have significantly more flavor than an equivalent triple distilled single malt whiskey. Now that's then when the maturation comes into play, and how do you do that? How do you enhance the flavor if maybe someone's been stripped out in the first place, you know? So I think that's really the big difference, and for the Cooley single malt whiskies, having that double distillation as opposed to triple.
Couple of comments coming in there. So we've got Keane saying it's very fine on the palate. Andrew really hangs on the glass. So going back to what you were saying, Alan, that viscosity, and you can kind of still see, you know, like 2 or 3 minutes later, like there's still legs and tears and that rim around the glass. Brian is asking, is this the same liquid as the Fercullen 18 cast strength Muscatel finish released in Germany last year? This aged a little longer.
You know the answer to that, Alan?
Yeah, I'm not 100% on that because I wasn't privy to that liquid that went out. So it could well be the same liquid that went out to Germany that time, but I'm not 100%.
You heard it here first. Alan said 100% this is the same liquid that went out to Germany last year. Andrew there is asking, was double distilling the norm for Cooley back then for all their liquids?
All their malt liquid anyway. I mean, they have a grain plant as well, and obviously you can't quantify how many times a continuous still is distilled, despite, you know, some companies do. But if something is in a continuous still, it's distilled hundreds, if not thousands of times before it moves out of that still. So though with the continuous still back in 2000 for grain whiskey anyway, they were passing it through the still twice. And in latter years, they just because of volume requirements, they actually pass it through 3 stills for grain whiskey. But it's not triple distilled, nor was it double distilled back then either. But the malt is all double distilled, as down in Kilbeggan as well. 2 small little stills down in Kilbeggan.
So I think that is a good segue for us to move on to our next sample, unless anybody in the comments or the chat would like to ask anything else for the lads. No, we're good. So John, am I right in saying Marsala is the next?
Marsala, yes.
So I suppose we can go into a little bit more detail later on, but in terms of the proportions of the actual elements themselves, I'm assuming it's not just 20%, 20%, 20%, or it actually is closer to an even split amongst them.
Well, that's one of the things that I wouldn't tell you, no matter what. That is, I mean, look, that is something that, you know, where Noel Sweeney stands apart from others insofar as his years of experience. He can just taste these and in his head, initially anyway, figure out what works with what and what percentages. I do know he, like, as I said, he'll start off with the bourbon. So that I won't necessarily say is the majority, but more than likely it is. And then he will just, in his head, he'll have an idea of what it is, and he'll play around and put those elements in and see then does that stand up, and then maybe dial something back or dial something up. And that's the art of blending, you know. But just like Coca-Cola won't tell you the secret of the blend goes into that. You know, certainly if I was to tell you now exactly what Noel did, I don't think I'd have a role come Monday morning, you know.
Fair enough. I'll tell you what, we'll ask you after whiskey number 5 and we'll see if you're still as pilot.
We wouldn't really know the quantities that went in where either, but like if it's a heavy hitting liquid, it's going to have less in it than for the others,
Yeah.
in fairness.
We've got Brian there asking or saying, be interesting to see if anyone could reconstruct the 20-year-old tomorrow. If anybody would like to blend their own 5 elements with the samples, I say that jokingly, but I was hosting a tasting last night, which was another deconstruction, and halfway through I started blending with the components myself. And I'm not going to say I nailed it, but I fucking nailed it. But yeah, I would say taste all your samples first before you start blending on the fly. So Marsala, another fortified wine style, a little bit more popular these days, it seems. But I feel like there was a bit of an absence in it from the market for a couple of years.
Yeah, I suppose Marsala got a bit of a bad reputation for a long period of time, insofar as it was often seen as just a cooking wine. It's originally from Sicily, I believe. It's Italian, and it is, again, it was primarily as a digestif rather than aperitif. Sorry, this one aperitif, and usually anywhere between sort of 15 to 20% alcohol. Made with Italian grapes that don't really exist outside of Italy, the likes of Grillo, Insolia, Catarato, and one other one which I'm going to have to look up because I can't remember, Damasceno. So it, which mean nothing to me, I have to admit. But compared to the Moscatel, Marsala, a bit more darker, a bit more brown sugar, a bit more nuttiness coming through on it. There's more sort of dried fruits. You're getting more now towards your typical type of Irish finishing style, you know, the use of sherries and all of that. So this is getting more towards that style, certainly with that nuttiness and that dark fruit and the dried fruits. It isn't too dissimilar, again, to Olorasa in that regard.
It smells more dense, if that makes sense. Where like it
does.
I always get these slightly kind of jammy flavors whenever I nose or smell a whiskey that has Marsala influence. And
one of the things I should have said before the Moscatel, the finishing period for these finishes, obviously the bourbon is 20-21 years, all bourbon, all X7 Hill. The finishing period for the other 4 whiskies are 4 years. So it was at 16 years, Noel took it out of bourbon barrels and put it into these finishing casks. So a nice 4-year finish, which is more than sufficient. But you know, the whiskey can stand up to it, which is great.
It feels like finish can be such a nebulous term. It could be 3 months, it could be 3 years.
Yeah, it really depends on the cask. You know, I've often said, you know, it's very seldom I've tasted a bad whiskey. Now I have in my career, judging competitions in France, for example. Jesus, that was an awful, some terrible whiskies.
I tasted some French whiskey recently, and I must agree they should stick to wine for the moment.
Yeah. Now I think they are changed. There are some good ones coming on, but back then there was one. I think my tasting note was Angel Delight. It was foul, but anyway. That was a weird tangent to go off. And what was I trying to get across? Oh yeah, finishing. So some of the bad whiskies from good companies, okay, that I've tasted have been where it's a finished whiskey and the finish is taken over. Okay, I consider myself a whiskey person. My career has been in the whiskey. I like my whiskey to taste of whiskey. I don't particularly want my whiskey to taste of Pedro Jimenez, for example. I want enough Pedro Jimenez to make it interesting. I want enough there to add a balance or add a character to it. But if I want to drink something that's Pedro Jimenez, I'm going to spend €20 on a bottle of Pedro Jimenez rather than €100 on a bottle of whiskey. You know what I mean? So that is the fine point. And as you said, you know, it can be 3 months, it can be 12 weeks, it can be whatever. Some of the whiskies that I've been involved with blending over the past few years, you know, I found 12 weeks was more than enough to get enough flavor of what I wanted into it, and make it interesting and make it different and get it out into the market. So, but having said that, you know, it's not just, you know, we talk about the finish, but you got to remember the barrel itself. How old is that barrel? Is that barrel kind of, for want of a better term, is it knackered anyway? If it is, it's going to need longer. If it's a fresher barrel, a recently emptied barrel that held liquid in it for a long period of time, well, then you're not going to need as long for the finish. You're only going to need a much shorter period because it's going to be more instantaneous. The other thing that comes into play is, and people often don't think about that, is the time of the year when you're doing the finish. You know, if you're putting whiskey into finishing barrel today, for example, well, nothing's going to happen come until April or May, you know, just because it's bloody cold. Whiskey, you know, essentially goes asleep under 3-4 degrees centigrade. So a lot of finishing you'll see, and certainly when I've been involved and I'm looking for a quick finish, it's May, June, July. Get it in that time, and let it expand into the wood pretty much straight away, and then maybe, you know, flavor could come quite quickly. So that's one of the things that people don't often think about. But back to this whiskey. So nice sort of, again, a musty spice on it. Look, they're all 20-year-old liquids. You're going to get that. You're going to get that tannic nature of the oak itself coming through on it, because it's just so old. But yeah, there is definitely a nuttiness. There is that dark sugar, that brown sugar element there on the nose, without a doubt. No, little sip. A lot sweeter, I think, than the previous one.
It's more lively kind of on the palate than you'd expect to it, maybe based on the smell.
Yeah. You're kind of thrown off a bit. You feel from the nose, it's going to be a lot more unctuous. It's going to be a lot darker. It's actually, your word vibrant. It's really, really vibrant on the mouth. Again, quite a lot of almost floral nature coming through on it. Lovely sweetness.
I was expecting like a caramel chew.
Yeah.
But like as Darren said, it was very vibrant and floral.
Yeah, it is. Now there's a lovely spice there at the back that it's just kind of stuck to the side of your cheeks. The viscosity giving lovely spice. Quite tannic, I think, coming through on it. It is pulling it in a bit from the oak itself, from the barrels. Yeah, you can see why this one is getting a bit more popular as a standalone whiskey release, and certainly there have been some phenomenal recent. I think a big winner at the whiskey awards lately was a Marsala finish. So no, you can see it. It really does work. It does work while still retaining the maltiness of the actual whiskey itself, not overpowering it at all.
Absolutely. We've got Andrew there saying initially quite soft before the dark fruit and spice kicks in at the back end. Yeah, like it's a very layered, complex sensation that you're getting, and the flavors they do develop. And even now, a minute after having had it initially, I'm like, yeah, I can kind of get these slightly maybe more bittersweet notes coming in, and you know, almost like kind of the bitterness that you get from, like, say, an orange rind or an orange zest. That's kind of what's sticking with me.
Yeah, almost like, you know, with a char at the back of the zest, you know, and throw it into whatever that type, because that the kind of char, the tannic, that element is there. No, that's lovely actually as a standalone, I have to say. That's 56.3% alcohol.
Perfect for a cold night like this evening.
Yeah, definitely. Gee, sorry. Need to throw a log in the fire. Hold on, 1 sec. Sorry.
Guys, don't be afraid to throw in what you think of that one there. We've obviously had Andrew say what he thinks. Alan, I suppose from your perspective, you know, you'd be out on the road and out in the market. How is it that you sell Fercullen to a prospective shop who could potentially sell it? Like, what's the unique selling point of the brand?
Unique selling points, as well as Noel's expertise and what have you, and what he's done. The liquids alone stand alone. Once I can get someone to actually taste our liquids, the selling, the face-to-face selling then becomes very, very easy, and then it's just showing people what we're about in the distillery and what we're going to be doing going forward. I mean, there's probably a lot of people on this deconstruct tonight that I've already tasted our new make, and what we're doing with our new make. There's a consistency there, as John alluded to earlier on. A lot of our liquids will have Noel's character and Noel's signature across them, but Noel's team have been working very closely with Noel over the last 3 years as well. So even if Noel is not there for a couple of days, the guys are still continuing making the continuous liquid. I've been in a fortunate place where I've got to taste 2018 new make, 2019 new make, 2020 new make, 2021 new make, and there's consistency all the way across the years. So it's good liquid. So Noel's philosophy: good liquid into good wood, and you'll make fantastic whiskey. So that's the route we're sticking on, and hopefully we obtain that anyway.
Lovely. I suppose this question for both of you as well. Like, these are fairly limited releases. I think it's 1,500 bottles per for both the 18 and for the 20. And as we know, whiskey collecting has become all the rage, especially during 2020. Is this a whiskey that you think people, should put away, or is it very much get it and just drink it?
It's for me, it's not something you'd sit down on a Wednesday night and have a drama out of. Even though I would love to do that, I'd love to have the money to be able to buy bottles of these and have a numerous amount of bottles available to do that. This is a special occasion whiskey that you'd sit down with a few pals, maybe over Christmas, over your birthday, or any other special occasions you have, and you whip this out and crack the bottle. It's really a showpiece whiskey for me. I don't know if John will agree or they...
Oh no, definitely agree. It is a really special occasion whiskey. It's a fantastic whiskey. It is, my philosophy all the way through, and anyone who followed my career would have seen that with any of the releases that I brought out from Beam Suntory Cooley, they were all priced for drinking. And that's essentially the way I always saw it. Yeah, I price things for drinking, and because nice to look at on a shelf, but ultimately, the real memories are made was when you open it. There's no memory of, oh, do you remember looking at that bottle of whiskey? The memory is, do you remember that night when we opened that bottle of whiskey? And that for me is, I have that romantic notion when it comes to whiskey, and it comes to that, it is something for an occasion. And then there's different, you do have, as Alan said, you have your everyday drinking whiskies, and then you have your special occasion whiskies. I mean, the morning of my wedding all those years ago, I myself and my best man had a 1943 Kilbeggan. And then when each one of my children were born, when I got back from the hospital, that's what I toasted them with. Now, why did I do that? Well, because it was a special occasion. It was a special whiskey. It was a shite whiskey, unfortunately. It was bloody awful. But it was a special occasion. When do you get an opportunity to drink a 1943 Kilbeggan? So. And they're the memories now I have of that. Now I could have held on to that bottle and thrown it up on an auction site and something like that, but and maybe I could have bought something nice for them, but it's not the same. I can talk about it now. It's something that I've done, and it's something that will always stay with me, rather than forgotten on a shelf or forgotten on an auction site. But that's just my philosophy. I'm old school.
I'm knocking on one of the doors of one of those occasions fairly soon. So I have a bottle of 20-year-old in the house, which I will open for that occasion.
There you go. Good. Look forward to it. Okay, we'll move on to our next one, which is the Olorasa.
Yes. So more traditional cask, I suppose. These have been a fairly common feature with Irish whiskey for decades, centuries, I'm going to say. But do you want to tell us a bit about the cask that you guys get and
well, we don't go for a particular we don't have a relationship with any particular bodega or anything like that. A lot of our casks are purchased through brokers, so I couldn't tell you what bodega this actually came from or what type of Oloroso was in it. What I do know is Oloroso itself is obviously from the Palomino grape. It is one of the three standard Spanish style of sherries that are primarily produced, well, anywhere kind of around Andalusia. You do see sherries being produced around Malaga, but the majority are around Jerez to the sort of, it's to the west of Andalusia. So the three main styles are Fino, Amontillado, and then Oloroso. Oloroso is aged longer than the other two whiskey or the other two sherries. So that's its main point of difference. With the longer aging really brings in a nuttiness. It really brings in that dried fruit element. And it is, as you said, Darren, it is the one that, is probably best known within the Irish whiskey industry. Though for a long period of time, it was just sherry cask finish. There wasn't the breakdown of the specific styles of sherry because, look, 20 years ago, people didn't really know about different styles of sherries. And it's really only with the advent of people traveling more and going into a wine bar in the south of Spain and seeing, Fino or Amontillado or Pajarete or Pedro Jimenez or Oloroso, whatever, Dulce, whatever, and trying them all and seeing. But certainly as a finishing cask, it would be the most popular. Also in Scotland as well, a lot of the brands that I worked for over my career would have used a lot of Oloroso finishing as well. So nuttiness, there's a dryness. There is that a really strong Oloroso flavor is, and this sounds completely ridiculous, but it's like as a child, if you lick the back of a leather belt, you get that type of flavor from it as well. But it is, walnuts, autumnal things, tobacco, all these elements that come through with Oloroso.
Just Fergus there saying incredible color, and it absolutely is. Like you suppose you forget the breadth of colors that whiskies can have, and even just looking at the samples that we have, we're going from very, very light all the way up to these deep, darker colors. And for people when they come into the shop, they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize whiskey could be anything but just brown."
Yeah. No, it's only when you have them in a line like this that you actually appreciate it. For me, this one's really nutty. It's almost like on the nose, certainly. It's like Brazil nut dust. Breaking out Brazil nuts and you get the little dust. There's that real sort of nutty, Brazil nuts there on the nose, and it's difficult to get past that actually.
Yeah, like now that you kind of say, I suppose there is always that thing where you say a certain flavor and then your mind immediately makes those links.
Yeah.
Somebody once ruined Lefroy for me by saying that it smelled like barbecue sauce, and now every time I go back to Lefroy, I'm like, "Fuckers, it smells like barbecue sauce now."
There's actually one of the guys that was part of the distilling team for the 14-year-old that we do. Had a very particular pineapple juice from a can was his key tasting note for the 14-year-old. And every time I go back to it now, I'm like, Jesus, he's right.
The power of suggestion.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've added a little bit of water into this because it's actually, for me, it's a little bit hot. It's 55% alcohol, so it's kind of in the middle of everything that we're sampling. But I feel like it feels like it's quite tight, and it feels like you need a little bit of water just to open up the elements to allow them maybe to mingle.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alan?
I'm getting a bit more fruit from it now after adding water.
Yeah. It definitely does. It definitely does open it up, and I've come across that in the past, whereby whiskey, at cask strength is just like a really tight ball of flavor, and you need to do something to open it up to get the nuances out of it, and just that few little drops of water just allows it to open up and allows the different flavors to really combine and come together. And this one certainly, I think. Certainly my suggestion is to add a little bit of water to it.
I've taken your suggestion. I'm normally not one for adding water just because I feel like I never get it right. It's always too finicky for me. But yeah, it just becomes a lot more brighter when you do add that little bit of water in there. And that fruitiness, it's still a dried fruit, but it's almost like a fresher dried fruit, which is an oxymoron, I know. But
no, it is that. It's almost like I know, like not quite a melon, but some hard-skinned fruit, and you've opened it up, and there's a little bit of freshness, but it's more of the skin itself. It's that kind of drier element flavor coming through, and I just can't quite pinpoint which fruit.
Yeah.
If anyone does, throw it up there in the chat box. I will credit you in future.
My one failing when it comes to tasting whiskies is a lot of the things that I'm supposed to be tasting, I have no frame of reference for because I've never had them. Anytime I see a whiskey's meant to taste like a kiwi, I'm like, don't know, never had a kiwi. Fruit shouldn't be hairy, they freak me out. That was delicious, and I suppose my personal preference is I love a sherry cask. Like when I first got into whiskey, heavily sherried whiskeys were my thing, and it's something I think that is gonna, I'm gonna maintain. In terms of, this is obviously Olorasa. Is there room for experimentation with other types of sherries at Fercullen, or is it this kind of the style that you think you guys are going to stick with?
Well, this isn't exactly the style that we're sticking with, because the style that we have is bourbon, and that is our bread and butter, our day to day. Everything that we're making at present, well, certainly 99.9% of everything that comes off the still is being put into ex-bourbon barrels. So that's our base. Yes, there is room for experimentation. One of the things, I suppose, which is great with the growth of not just the Irish whiskey industry, but the global whiskey industry, is there's more access to interesting casks and interesting sizes and interesting finishes. So one of the things that I have been working with the team and Noel's team has been sourcing some of these interesting casks, and I have a few nice little sort of quarter casks have come in now that I'm playing around with a few different liquid styles, some very unusual ones, some then more traditional, but with a view to maybe having a sort of some type of a limited release in the future in a quarter cask size, which would be, it just means you can change it quickly enough. You can get something else out, and have a series like that. To answer your question, yes, there is room for experimentation and different things, but we're not all of a sudden going to be releasing, a standard element, wrong word, but standard release sherry whiskey. That's not what we're going to be doing. Okay.
We've got a couple of comments there. Yeah. So Brian and Reno just saying that, yeah, very, very oily, very dense oils. And Reno is saying that the finish does not feel as long as the other ones. I think,
yeah, it is significantly shorter finish. You're absolutely right on that. Now, why? I have no idea.
It's the weird alchemy of it all, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. That's whiskey making for you. Noel with a wizard's hat, just kind of
over his cauldron.
Yeah.
So that is 4 elements done so far.
Yes.
The final, I suppose, element before we try the finished product would be the Pedro Jimenez.
Yes.
I just butchered the pronunciation of that, I know.
Right.
Tried to do something fancy, a mini Spanish accent, but it didn't quite work out for me. Now, this is a style of sherry that on its own I do not like. I just think it's too much. But the whiskies that I've had a Pedro Jimenez influence have been absolutely delicious. And I don't know if I'm alone in that, if people, they prefer the cask for the whiskey rather than the actual liquid itself.
Yeah, the Pedro Jimenez, in my experience, is one of the most difficult finishes to actually get right. It's one of those, and I described it there a few times, and I described it to Matt Healy there at an event we were at a few weeks ago. I described using PX casks or Pedro Jimenez casks as like they're the avocado of the whiskey world. And what do I mean like that? I mean, it's like not quite there, not quite there, not quite there. For a very brief period, it's perfect. And then after that, fucking takes over, just explodes, And Pedro Jimenez is very much like that, insofar as you really need to be on top of it as you're letting it finish, because like that, it can turn. It can just be gone too far. And, when I said earlier, some of the worst whiskies I've ever tasted have been finishes. They all had one thing in common. They were all PX finishes, where it had just taken over. And that for me is not what a whiskey should be. So it is a difficult one to get right. Pedro Jimenez itself is obviously this sort of almost sort of sweet sherry dessert wine type element. It's made again down in Andalusia, a lot of it around Malaga, but it's actually got its own region with its own distinct classification, which is the region of Montilla Moriles. And that's where most of the Pedro Jimenez comes from. It's where Pedro Jimenez grape itself grows very well. Interestingly, the Pedro Jimenez grape is quite, it can be. It can die off quite easily. It can, pick up different sort of grape rot and things like that quite easily. So there's certain lands, especially where the traditional sherry areas around Jerez, the land there and the earth there isn't really conducive to growing Pedro Jimenez. So it is even to grow the feckin' thing, it's difficult, Then the Pedro Jimenez grapes are laid out in the hot Spanish sun and just dried essentially up to a withered little grape. What's that doing? Well, it's intensifying the sugars. It's really turning it into this really, really sugary type of dried up grape. Okay. It's then aged in a classic Solera system. So you'll add from the top and you'll take down from the bottom and all of that. But for me, Pedro Jimenez is that syrupy nature. It is a type of wine that I do enjoy, and unfortunately, I do try to travel to Spain quite a lot. Pedro Jimenez is always something I'll have when I go out, finishing up a meal and such. But it is quite a syrupy. It is quite a decadent, quite an unctuous, quite a I think in that series, that video that you started, what was the introduction? We've been releasing one of these a week on each of the casks. And I think on the PX cask, I described it as like squished figs or something along those lines. It's that type of flavor coming through on the whiskey. So if you're not following us on social media, do so. There's a few more of those videos, or just look back on it and you'll see those videos where it's just a conversation between myself and Noel in the warehouse, talking about what goes into the whiskies and what goes into each specific cask, and you'll be glad to hear it's mostly Noel doing the talking, so someone who actually knows what he's talking about. But for me, yeah, this is sweet dried fruits, this is figs, this is all those elements. On the nose, again, there's a sweetness, and there is definitely a syrupy nature on the nose. This is classic PX nose for me. It hasn't gone too far. There's the tannic nature, there's the mustiness, there's that dryness there, but there is a that unctuous viscosity on the nose.
I get this almost kind of like this biscuity cereal note still shining through, and I'm inclined to it reminds me of fig rolls. You've got the outer biscuit and then the inner filling, which I have no idea how they get inside there.
Nobody does. Nobody does.
That's the thing. Just happens.
Nobody does. Do you know, Alan? No.
If they told us that, they'd have to kill us.
They would. They would, definitely.
Stay tuned for the Celtic Whiskey Fest fig roll deconstruction video coming up in a few weeks.
Soaked in whiskey.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound that bad.
It's a new choice.
Yeah.
But this one then, this is 54.3% alcohol. I just took a sip of it there. Lovely. Yeah, real viscous. And that's what you're gonna get with Pedro Jimenez. You're gonna get that. It's a syrupy oiliness rather than just an oiliness. There's a word I often use describing whiskies, which I think is often just misused in the English language, and as a result, it's one of those words that's almost dying out, and that's voluptuous. And this whiskey has this voluptuous nature. It's just all encompassing. It's all around your mouth. It's oiliness, it's syrupy, you're almost chewing on it. It's a real tannic nature. I mean, this is definitely the most tannic of all the whiskeys so far. I mean, my cheeks are completely drying out and pulling in almost like Peter Cushing, just all the way in. But yeah, and real dry aftertaste. Which that's one of those. Very Moorish. Gonna add a little water to it actually and just see how that does.
I love it when whiskey tasting notes sound like they could also be featured in a Tinder profile. I think that's the that's the perfect balance to have, isn't it?
That's the first thing I thought of there.
Yeah, that's how both our minds are.
And I've never been on Tinder. Never.
I don't even know what it is.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
It's
I'm
tough
not
for you
sure.
to light your fire there, John.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, that type
yeah.
of Tinder. Yeah. I'll just look at. Actually, it's still okay. So.
Okay. That is so. I know these have all been cast strength, but this more so than the others hasn't had a cast strengthy, hit. It goes down smooth, and there's like no indication that this is necessarily 50 odd percent.
Yeah, I've just added water to it there now, and it is transformed completely. It is now all summer fruits. It's all just that sweetness, almost like, Wimbledon strawberries and cream. Not that I've ever been, but I know what strawberries and cream are like. It's a little bit of water. This is really, really just changed.
And measure some out.
I think I might have an idea for a new release, Alan.
Yeah, I'm on it.
Demand partial credit for that one. Just, by association.
Yeah, no, gorgeous with that little drop of water. Yeah, little drop of water. Good man. Good
Wimbledon release.
The Wimbledon, yeah, there we go. Sipsmith do it for the gin, so we might as well do it our whiskey. We become the official whiskey of Wimbledon. Yeah, that'll be an interesting one.
Folks in the chat, what do we think of this one? Yeah, the water just completely changes that.
Yeah, and it's like if you look at the Fercullen range, okay, and you go through what are the strengths of the different ones there, Alan?
So we've 40% on the 8, 40% on the 10, 46 on the 14, 43 on the 18, and then 2 5 elements are 46, and the Amarone finish is 46 as well.
Yeah, so people have asked Noel, especially if you look at the 14 and the 18, essentially, they're bourbon barrel matured, double distilled single malt that Noel made all those years ago, okay? And it's like, well, why is one 46 and why is the other 43? And he said, it's just, that's when it works. It just works at that. And each whiskey is very different and individual in that regard. And I mean, that certainly for me, that PX, and so many people go, it has to be cast strength, it needs to be cast strength, all that. For me, this is a much better whiskey with a little bit of water in it. So brought down from cask strength. Now, I know releasing in a cask strength gives all of us the option to do that and figure out that for ourselves. But me as a whiskey maker, it would be remiss of me to put something out when I know it's actually better at a different strength, So, something like this, just that water is just like completely blown my mind with it. It's phenomenal. Now,
I was lucky enough to try the finished product at cask strength, and it was fantastic. It was smooth. It didn't taste like a cask strength whiskey, but even though we brought it down to 46, it brought the whiskey even more to the forefront.
Yeah,
that it brought it to a new level.
Because sometimes it needs that. It needs that to bring the flavors out and get that, so it can all combine effectively and efficiently. Is that? But no, that's nice. That's nice. Note that one there, Al.
Yeah.
Got Andrew there saying candied fruit, licorice, and tobacco. And as soon as you said candied fruit, just the kind of sensation, the little tingling on the tongue almost reminds me of like when you've just had wine gums and you've got this sweetness that lingers, and then the fruit jelly underneath. Or even like fruit pastilles, I think actually. Andrew Wood there, I thought both the Olorasa and the PX were superb with a few drops of water. The other one I didn't think needed it. You're definitely not alone in that, Andrew. I think that'd probably be the consensus amongst the three of us at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. So now for the main event, and now to, I suppose, go on to, how Noel makes his money. How do you get these 5 whiskies that I think we all agree in their own right are eminently drinkable? How do you get them to sing together? How do you get them to work where all these different notes that we picked up don't dominate the other ones? How do we get that orchestra to play, hearing all those elements? Well, that's what I'm going to do now.
Skill set.
I'm going to get a fresh glass for this one.
I've just been reusing. I feel like I've been doing mini blends with the all the droplets that have been left in my glass. And I suppose having tried all the elements now, I've had this whiskey before. I've loved it, but like I'm looking at it from a different perspective now.
Breaking it down now, looking at each part separately to see if you can pick them out. I did the exact same thing when I tasted at cast strength, and then when we tasted it again at 46 on the release night, I was trying to pinpoint what I was picking up at cast strength again at the 46, but there was so much more involved in it at 46 than there was at cast strength.
Like for me, I think 46 to 50 is that perfect balance between, you know, getting the fullness of the flavors and also allowing the whiskey to shine through without being overpowered by the alcohol.
It was the same with the 18. When I originally tasted the 18 5 elements, you were picking up the tannins first, then you were getting the ruby part, and then you were getting the rum. Whereas when I tasted this, it was completely different because there was so much coming at you at once.
James there just saying, I love the Olorasa and PX much more than I thought I would. What suspense for this final dram. I suppose, John, we shouldn't keep people in suspense too much longer. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what we can expect on the nose of this?
You know, some of the things have changed a lot. And one of the notes that came up more than once so far this evening has been licorice. And I'm picking that up there. And I see Mark has just said he thinks the PX is dominant on it. And I said, that's always the worry when you're working with PX, is the fact that it can dominate. And certainly there is that syrupy nature. There is that unctuousness on the nose. But then there's that licorice, which I think earlier on we said, I can't remember which one we said it was coming from. But there's definitely that florally. There's a hint of the citrus coming through. There's a dark fruit. There's definitely that sort of dark honey or dark sugar, brown sugar, Muscovado or whatever it is. Sorry, what was that, Al?
Marsala coming through.
Yeah. So
I think the muscatel was what you said was licorice.
Okay.
So even finishing off, as you were saying about it being the finishing with the muscatel, it has that element. But it's complementing everything else.
And there's definitely, maybe not so much vanilla, but maybe more sort of creme caramel or sort of custard or that type of thing there, which is obviously, you know, his spine, which is the bourbon influence. Creme brulee. There we go. Spell it. Right. 46% alcohol.
That's just phenomenal, isn't it?
Just so much more going on.
Yeah.
We've tasted all the key elements and our cast strength, and now we've brought it back to 46, and you can taste so much more in it.
Very much, and I held that in my mouth for quite a time there. I think it was a Rob from Whiskey Magazine used to say, the age of the whiskey, that's the amount of seconds you keep it in your mouth. You know, you get to 20, you're going, you know, but I didn't quite do that. But
1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi.
Yeah. Whiskey splurting out. But it's one of those whiskey reminds me, bear with me on this one. Something like Maker's Mark, not saying flavor profile, but in the approach to mouthfeel. Insofar as you take something like Maker's Mark, there's no flavor at all at the front of your mouth. All the flavors at the back of your mouth, where your sweet receptors are. This whiskey is very much the same. The flavor profile, it is so sweet. There's so much of that there isn't the bitterness. There isn't the saltiness where are at the front or at the side of your tongue where those sweet receptors are. It's all, or sorry, where those taste receptors are, not sweet receptors. Your sweet receptors at the back. That crosses over your tongue before you actually know it's in your mouth. That's a quality whiskey where the sweetness is there. There isn't a bitterness. Now there is a tannins. You're getting that afterwards. You're getting that on the cheeks afterwards, pulling it. It's really salivating. I mean, I have to do a swallow now. You know, that dry swallow. There's no alcohol. There's no whiskey in my mouth, but there's enough saliva has just been produced that I need to swallow again. So you know, really, really well. And I think you're getting some of the nuttiness. The Olorasa is there. Certainly the syrupy PX, that squished figs element, the vanilla. And then the dryness. Every element of this is a minimum of 20 years of age. So there is going to be that tannic, charring type element on the side of your mouth. But, once again, Noel Sweeney's not in the Whiskey Magazine Hall of Fame for no reason. I think to this day, he's still the only Irishman who's both blender and distiller in it. We have distillers and we have blenders who are in it, but he's both. Phenomenal whiskey.
And coming back to what you said at the start about the bourbon barrel elements as they get older, getting on this kind of tropical fruit note, and that's actually a flavor that is shining through for me now, and it shows the quality of liquid, that even though there is now 4 different finishes on top of it, like the actual base liquid still shines through.
Yeah. It's once again, we'll just go back to my orchestra analogy. A conductor, ensuring that everyone can be heard, that every element is there. That's this whiskey. And someone said to me, I think maybe it was around the launch of this, or maybe it was some PR event I was doing for it, I can't remember, but we're sort of saying, 5 different finishes essentially. That's really complex. You don't hear that very often. And that's absolutely right. You don't hear that very often. Why don't you hear it very often? Because A, there possibly isn't, all the quality of liquid to be able to do it. But B, there's only a handful of people in the world who can actually do it. Who knows instinctively what will work with what, knows instinctively what amount of time is required, and also at what strength it should be. I've heard it from people, that should have been released at cask strength. Well, firstly, if it was a cask strength, it would have been probably another €40 more expensive because of the bloody taxes in this country, But secondly, no. It's remiss of a whiskey maker to release something when it's not at its optimal. And this, I'm not going to argue with no.
And very, very few people would, in fairness. I think, you give Noel Sweeney the benefit of the doubt. We've got Paula there just asking, and I feel like this is a tough one for both of you. It's like picking your favorite child. John and Alan, which do you prefer, the 18 or the 25 elements? I suppose quite different whiskies in the grand scheme of things, but do you have a preference yourselves?
I'm more closely, I suppose, affiliated to this one, having done the press launch and written a lot of the material for it and stuff like that. So for me, it's this one. I think it's seldom to get such complexity that is actually tasteable, if that's such a word, that you can taste. So for me, this 20-year-old is not just the better of the two, but I'll go further. This is one of the best Irish whiskies out there. Now, we only launched it 2 months ago, so it was too late for any of the competitions this year. But this for me is really showing the world the quality that you can get from Irish whiskey, and that this whiskey can stand up against, a 25-year-old Bowmore or whatever Macallan you want to say, because people just say, they're the best anyway. This can easily go up against them and come out on tops.
Really,
Alan? I thought it was hard to like when I tasted the 18.5 elements. My God, I thought it was so complex and groundbreaking in terms of what we were doing in terms of using more than 1 or 2 finishing casks. And we actually went on to win the World Whiskey Award last year with the 18.5 elements. And then when I heard about this and I heard about the different casks, originally there was some different casks we were going to use, and we got to this level and used these casks. And when I actually tasted the liquid, I will have to agree with John that this is by far probably the best liquid on the market. And it would be my preferred choice. In terms, I actually would go out and break the bank and buy the bottle of whiskey to drink, to be fair.
I had someone who has broken the bank to buy the bottle of whiskey to drink. I can agree. Although that haven't been said, and I'm not just saying this to blow smoke up your arse. The Fercullen range, I think, has to be some of, the most appropriately priced whiskey that is out on the market at the moment. And that's not to disparage other brands saying that they're charging too much, but I feel like you get exactly what you paid for, if not more, when you buy one of the Fercullen range.
And there's something there for everybody. Yeah. To be fair, across the whole range, your blended whiskey, your single grain, your range of malts with two different malts that we have there, and then our finishing malts and our finishing grain. There's something there for everybody. And the way we feel about pricing is we have to be fair to us, but we have to be fair to everybody else as well.
Very true. But also with the Fercullen range, I think it's often a underappreciated brand and whiskey. As a company, you know, Powerscore Distillery don't have the budgets of the big guys. Certainly aren't, you know, aren't going down the rabbit hole of a lot of people of having a new release every few weeks or every few months or something like that. No, stick to a core, stick to what's good, and put it out there. And I mean, the 8-year-old blend is, you know, one of the best blends on the market. You know, hands down, a sipping whiskey. I mean, let you into a secret. The malt element in it is 16 years of age. You know, yet it's an 8-year-old because the grain is 8-year-old. You know, so as the 14-year-old, I think is now my go-to single malt whiskey. It's got this intensity of flavor, this spiciness going on in it at the 46% that you don't often get at that age whiskey. Now, obviously, I've years of experience working with that style of whiskey anyway, being double distilled Cooley malts. But I think it's just an underappreciated brand. You're not going to see the massive big advertising budgets. You're not going to see us going for things. But people who know whiskey know, you know, where the value is, and you know, doing quite nicely. And then pull something like this out of the hat, and some of the things we have in the plans for the next few years. And you got to remember, our own whiskies turned 3 in August. So Wicklow distilled whiskey turned 3 in August, and you know, it's not quite right yet. Give me a little bit more time, and I'll myself and team will get something going on it. But you know, look out for Fercullen. There's certainly phenomenal liquid and a lot more to come.
And you know, I can speak from my own perspective in the shop. You know, when people come in and you tell them about the brand, they haven't heard of it. But from my perspective, I would say the 14 is the best Irish single malt under €100, hands down. It's gotten to the point where my colleagues in the shop will have to try to convince me to sell other whiskies now at this stage, and they're like, "Darren," I'm like, "Never, no." I know what I like, and that is like I think for people when they discover it, they, you know, it's a hidden gem, and you know, I'm kind of for myself looking forward to, you know, where you guys go from here. But anyway, I'll stop waxing lyrical and I'll get to some more of these questions and comments that are coming in.
In terms of the selling of it, in terms of the amount of popularity we've got, when I joined the company in 2019, we had probably about 30 locations where we're selling our product, and an online shop that wasn't really doing much. Now we've grown that online shop to doing quite a lot a year, and we've grown to about 120 off-trade accounts and 75 on-trade accounts, which is quite big, starting from probably 30 locations altogether in 2019. So in the space of 2 years, 18 months, nearly 2 years, and a global pandemic, we have grown exponentially. And we're happy with how it's gone, but we kind of can't get our heads around how quick we've grown that with a global pandemic and what have you. So we're extremely happy with how well we've done, and extremely grateful for all the people out there who are supporting us.
Good. Well, I suppose like from our perspective, we're always happy to support you, because also these are just sound. You know, I think that's nice. You know,
very much.
Like it's like whenever you're in the shop, like there's always good chats and good banter. We've got a few more comments there. So Noel is a genius, absolutely. Fergus, what an incredible whiskey. Well done, Noel. Brian Moynihan there. Sorry, bring the comment out. So it really is complex. I can taste a lot of the elements, and the dryness with the sweetness gives an interesting counterpoint. Mark, the nosing worried me, but on the palate, boy, this is sublime dram. PX moved back into the ranks. The bourbon and muscatel. Bourbon and muscatel doing a fantastic job. Got Andrew. I'm going to read all these guys. Just if you've taken the time to write them, I feel like I owe it to you to read them. I've re-poured some of the bourbon cast to try alongside. Love to hear how you found that, Andrew. Then we've got Andrew again, fully agreeing the 14 is the pick of the bunch under £100. And what price are the and the 14-year-old. 14 with us in Celtic would be 92, 95, and the 8 would be 46. I think they're the recommended retail price, Alan.
Yeah, recommended retail. Yeah. I think 44, 46 is recommended retail for the 8-year-old.
And then we've got Reno again. I brought some bottles of the 1-year-old from my dad in France. He opened it with his neighbors, who now all want to find to buy in France. Available in France, guys?
We are knocking on the door of France at the moment. Yeah, there should be stock landing in France in the next month or so. We are in 15 international countries now at this stage.
Very good.
So Canada, mainland Europe, the Baltics we've just hit as well. China's doing quite well for us. And then Ireland's doing quite well for us as well. So
good. And then just final one there, the Amarone Estate series is excellent. Are we looking at a new release in 2022 in that series? And we'll, at the same time, and many casts left in the cast program. So Estate series was one of the recent releases. When can we expect to see more of that?
Yeah, planning on some of that next year. The Estate series are it's going to be limited to 3 release series, all focusing on a different element within the Powerscourt estate. That is our home. So the first one was the Mill House, which physically is our home. That's where the visitor centre is, and the distillery is built behind that. One of the oldest buildings actually on the estate. And the next one, we haven't fully decided what it's going to be or the style it's going to be, but it will be coming out. Not necessarily going to be a finished whiskey. In fact, I'm gearing towards maybe not going down that route. But yeah, I'm looking to have a nice selection of different whiskies within this series that all come together really with number 3. So yeah, hopefully, no timeline, probably mid next year. It'll come out. So again, probably about 2,000 bottles, 2022 probably to be exact.
See what you did there. That's good to hear.
How many casts left in the cast program? Yeah, there are not many actually. So that is our cask program, which was limited to how many casts to begin with, Al?
397 to coincide with the height of the waterfall.
Yeah. So I think
we have about 30 or 40.
Yeah, I think last I heard there was 30 odd left, and that's it. So that's a 10-year program. 7K plus change, and it's so it's a longer program than a lot. It's a full bourbon barrel, and it's our malt, single malt liquid. So it's a pretty good program, considering the price that they have gone lately. It's not an investor program. So that's people who just want to have a part and be part of our growth strategy and of our progression. So you see a lot of Dublin publicans and a lot of individuals, whiskey clubs and things like that, with casks. So yeah, societies. Yeah, so it's a nice program.
Myself and the fiance have been down twice now, and every time we leave, we're like, "Do you want to go for a cask?" And we're like, "We should buy a house first." But one day, if there's any of them left, might be coming down to you. Guys, look, we're just after reaching the hour and a half mark there. So I think we will start wrapping things up. But before we do, just a few things to say to everyone who joined us on the chat. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I can say it was a thoroughly enjoyable night. The whiskies were excellent. John, Alan, you've been fantastic, and really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us this evening. For those of you who have not done any of these tastings before, if this is your first one, Celtic Whiskey Fest, we have, I think, a few more on the lineup coming up. So do check out CelticWhiskeyShop.com for any of the future ones. Even if tastings have already happened, the packs are still available. And if you are looking to try some of these whiskies, the Fercullen range, we do have the full range in the shop. So do come in to us or give us a call or go online. John, Alan, any final closing thoughts before we
No, thanks. Look, I just want to thank everyone for deciding to tune in this evening, for first of all seeing it and spending money on it. We really appreciate it. For us, and Alan said it, it's getting people like you and letting you try our whiskies and see what's out there. You're not going to see us in every magazine. You're not going to see us in billboards. You're not going to see us in things like that. It's word of mouth, and it's liquid on lips, and that's the way we're gonna grow this business. So from me anyway, and from the team, thank you all for coming into this evening.
Yeah, from me as well. Thanks very much for supporting the distillery over the past few years. You've kept me in a job, which is always good. And yeah, thanks for joining us tonight and trying some fantastic whiskies, which I see is all agree with us. We'll try and keep our end of the bargain by putting out more fantastic whiskies, and you keep your end of the bargain by buying them. So thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, folks. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Cheers. Good night.
Right, Slodger.